All right, Bismillah. Let's start this.
And please welcome to the stage BBC's New Generation Thinker 2024. He's appeared on Jubilee's Surrounded and the Joe Rogan podcast. When he walks in with an itty-bitty waist and that round thing in your face, you get sprung. Dr. Jack Symes.
Welcome. We're on. Well, thank you so much for being here. You need to stop saying things like that, Paul, at the start. They're getting
so
worse.
fast.
I don't know. I need to stop upsetting you so much. Welcome here to the beautiful Royal Institution Theatre for The Question of God. I had the absolute pleasure of co-producing this evening for the first time. And in my place, my very good friend and the wonderful Johnny Thompson will be hosting tonight's panel. There are so many people working behind the scenes to make tonight possible. So before I invite our guests onto the stage, please join me in giving a huge round of applause to everybody working here at the theatre. Thank you so much for making it possible. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have two fan favourites, returning guests here at the theatre. We know you're big fans of them as well, hence why the theatre is absolutely packed this evening. Dr. Craig and Alex O'Connor joining us again. When they come on stage, please give them a massive round of applause, especially because Johnny Thompson's here with us for the first time. So without further ado, Dr. William Lane Craig, Johnny Thompson and Alex O'Connor! Woo!
We did.
Thank you. What a warm welcome. Brilliant, thank you. Good evening and welcome to this beautiful venue where we will be talking about theology, philosophy and religious belief. I am Johnny Thompson, and tonight I'm inviting two wonderful guests to explore the question of God for us all here tonight. On my right is a man who has for 40 years made the philosophical case for Christian theism the central project of his life. He's debated more atheists in more universities than perhaps anyone alive, and somewhere in the middle of all that he's revived a medieval cosmological argument that has been gathering dust since the 12th century and turned it into one of the most discussed arguments in the contemporary philosophy of religion. He is now working on a 5-volume systematic philosophical theology. Having settled the question of if God exists, he is turning to the question of what God is like. Please welcome William Lane Craig.
Is he wearing makeup?
And on my left is a man who picked up some of those arguments as a teenager in Oxford and took them seriously, took them apart, and somewhere along the way became one of the most watched philosophers of his generation. He's the host of the Within Reason podcast, where he has interviewed the likes of Richard Dawkins, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Slavoj Žižek, and of course the man sitting opposite him tonight. He describes himself as an agnostic atheist, but a curious one, increasingly drawn to the figure of Jesus and increasingly suspicious of the idea that the truth...
Agnostic atheist? What is that? I thought you're either an atheist or an agnostic. They're like, I don't know.
The truth of things can be exhausted by argument alone. He is the rare treat of someone who welcomes discussion and dialectic rather than point scoring and argument.
Because an atheist was someone who says, I do not believe that in the existence of God. An agnostic is someone who says, we cannot know if God exists or doesn't exist. So,
please welcome
difference.
Alex O'Connor. So without any more preamble, we're going to dive into the meat of the issue tonight. And the first question is a big one. It's for you, Dr. Craig. Should we believe in God and why?
Okay. Well, I'd like to begin by explaining why I am so truly glad to be here this evening. This event comes midway through a speaking tour of England. And after the events on Saturday, I came down with severe laryngitis, completely lost my voice. And it looked like the rest of the tour was in jeopardy. In fact, the events in Durham had to be canceled. But I want to publicly express my gratitude to our dear friends, Dr. Peter and Heather May in Southampton, who were able to procure for us a doctor here in London who actually made a house call early Monday morning to our hotel. And after looking at us, he wrote some prescriptions for medications that put me on the road to recovery, thereby certainly saving the event tonight. As well as hopefully the remainder of the tour. So I am really glad to be with you. Now, with respect to our time this evening, this is not going to be a debate between Alex and me. Rather, this is going to be a conversation where we openly discuss.
Why you guys do that? Why you guys do that? This is a clear debate. There's a Christian apologist against an atheist. And you're going to talk about the problem of evil. You're going to talk about suffering. You're going to talk about God. This is a clear debate. I don't know why you're so afraid and you're so pacifist when it comes to this kind of events. You know, let's not debate. Let's just have a casual conversation. Yeah, there is a time and there's a place. But when it comes to this kind of events, that is a debate.
Pardon me, I'd probably be coughing. But I've got my tea, got my throat lozenges here, and so I think we're going to have a great time. And philosophers like to make distinctions in answering questions. So when Johnny asks what reasons are there to believe in God, it's important to distinguish between believing in God and believing that God exists. Believing in God means trusting in God, committing one's life to God in worship and love and obedience. And the reason you should do that is obvious, because God is the supreme benefactor. He is the source of eternal life, the source of forgiveness and salvation. So clearly you should believe in God. But I think Johnny's real question is, well, but why believe that God exists? You can't believe in God if you don't believe that God exists. And in my philosophical work, I've defended both what I call exterior and interior ways of answering that question. Exterior arguments and evidences concern philosophical and scientific arguments that lead to the existence of God. For example, I've defended 6 of these in my work. First, that God is the best explanation of why anything at all exists, rather than nothing. Second, that God is the best explanation for the absolute beginning of the universe at a point in the finite past. Thirdly, God is the best explanation for the uncanny applicability of mathematics to the physical phenomena. Fourth, God is the best explanation for the incomprehensible fine-tuning of the universe for embodied interactive life. Fifth, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, sixth, the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists. Now, together, I think these...
Wait, what was the last one?
Implies that God exists. Embodied, interactive life. Fifth, God is the best explanation for the objectivity of moral values and duties in the world. And finally, sixth, the very possibility of God's existence implies that God exists.
What? I'm not sure about the 6th one. Like, I know, yeah, I would agree with the 5 premises. The last one, just because something is possible, something's a possibility, therefore it implies its existence. I don't think so.
Now, together, I think these 6 arguments constitute a powerful cumulative case that God exists. If you were to ask me why I believe the Christian God exists, then we would need to go beyond these arguments to examine the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Who was this man, Jesus of Nazareth? And I believe that he claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, the Son of God in a unique sense, and the divine human Son of Man, prophesied by the prophet Daniel. And I think that God vindicated those radical personal claims by which he put himself in God's place by raising him from the dead. Now, I realize that most people think that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just believe in by faith or not. But in fact, there are 4 well-established historical facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth that are agreed upon by the vast majority of New Testament scholars that have written on this.
Here's the thing. As a Muslim, I agree with his 5 premises, right? These 5 arguments that he presented, or 5 claims, right, are they're pretty reasonable. But the thing is that since he's a Christian, he's going to butcher their entire thing. Because as soon as you bring in the biblical God into these arguments, therefore, like, your arguments are already, destroyed, right? I agree with all the 5 examples he gave, but then because of he believes in this biblical God, Christianity completely contradicts these 5 arguments, right? And so I'm writing on something, right? I'm writing on this particular thing. As a theist, you can argue the problem of evil easily, and you can debunk and destroy the so-called problem of evil when it comes to debating atheists and agnostics. However, if you bring the biblical God, then it's going to be a contradiction because of the false attributes that they give him.
Subject.
We'll
and these would include first his honorable interment by Joseph of Arimathea in a tomb following his crucifixion. Secondly, the tomb was discovered on the first day of the week following the crucifixion by a group of Jesus' female followers to be empty. Third, the various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death on various occasions and under a variety of circumstances. And finally, number 4 is that the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. And I think that when the alternative explanations for those facts are weighed by the usual criteria that historians use for evaluating historical hypotheses, then the superiority and plausibility of what I call the resurrection hypothesis emerges. That is, that the original disciples were right, that God had raised Jesus from the dead. And so for that reason, I am enthusiastically a Christian theist. Now, so much for the exterior way.
What are the historical criteria that the historians used for this specific event? Your historical criteria is the Bible, the 4 Gospels, right? This is the thing that the Christians do today. They take the Bible as a historical account. And everything that the Bible says about whatever happens during the time of Jesus is the truth, right? Yeah, no, I don't believe anything that, like you said something interesting. The usual criteria that the historians use. And then you go to the Gospels and say like, yeah, no, the Gospels came like years after the fact. They're written by anonymous people about something they didn't even witness, right? And you take that as a historical fact. That's a big problem, right?
Down through history, most Christians haven't believed in God on that basis. The vast majority of Christians, like a medieval peasant farmer or someone working in the rice fields of Laos, don't have the education or the library resources or the leisure time to look into philosophical arguments for God's existence or the evidence for the New Testament. Rather, they believe in God on the basis of a personal experience of God himself. In particular, they've experienced the risen Lord in their lives. The Easter hymn writer says, "Have you asked me how I know he lives? He lives within my heart." And I think that that is a perfectly valid way. So even though I am an enthusiastic proponent of evidentiary exterior arguments for the truth of Christian faith, I don't think they're necessary. I think that it's perfectly rational to take belief in Christianity as a properly basic belief grounded in our personal experience of God himself.
Okay. So he started it like very, very well. He presented his 6 arguments, right? 5 of them are reasonable. But then number 6 makes no sense. I want to see how he's going to explain that part. And he says it's completely reasonable to base your faith on a complete subjective experience, right? Like subjective emotional experience. That's rubbish, right? How would you know that's actually Jesus coming to you like in a dream or whatever, right? That's the thing. When you talk about arguments, when you talk about scripture, for example, this is something that he was talking about, right? He said in the medieval era, right, and even so during the time of Jesus and before World War II, actually, most people did not have access to the Bible and to the scripture, right? And even if they did, they wouldn't have the ability or the skills to read it and comprehend it, right? So they have to rely on their priests and fathers when they go to church. And whatever the church fathers tells them is the truth. They have to completely rely and trust their fathers, like the church fathers and priests were with their own salvation. Why? Because they're ignorant, right? Unfortunately, today it's not. It's no longer the case. You don't have to trust your priest in the church or anyone else. Actually, you can check the scripture yourself, and you have enough skills. You have enough intellectual tools to go and check whatever the scripture says about your salvation. That's the difference. Anyway.
Thanks very much. There's a lot there to unpack, and we'll park for the moment, Alex, any arguments you might have against the existence of God, and we'll park also for the moment the question of Jesus and of Christianity. I was wondering if you might be able to tackle first what Dr. Craig calls the exterior arguments for God, particularly what sounds like, you said 5 ways?
Six.
Particularly like a version of cosmological argument that he raised at the beginning.
I think the 5 ways was somebody else. Yeah, of course, an atheist engaged in these discussions spends their time doing 2 things, providing positive reasons not to believe in God, and there's really only one popular version of that. But more often, for that reason, they spend their time responding to arguments that are put forward. So Dr. Craig has put forward 6 of these. And the atheist's job is to see whether they think that these arguments essentially hold. So for example, Dr. Craig says that God is the best explanation of the finite part of the universe, the fact that the universe had a beginning at a moment in time. And the questions that need to be asked in response to that are, did the universe have a beginning? How would we know that it had a beginning? If it had a beginning, how do we know that it needs some kind of cause? Now, Dr. Craig is perhaps most famous for his Kalam cosmological argument, which seeks to establish these facts, that everything which begins to exist has a cause, that the universe had a beginning, and that therefore the universe had some kind of cause. And if the universe is the totality of all space, time, and matter, then the cause of the universe must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and so on. Most attention in this argument is given to the second premise, that is, that the universe began to exist. Now, some of you may be under the apprehension that Big Bang cosmology tells us from a scientific perspective that the universe had a first moment. That is not true. The evidence for the Big Bang...
Sorry, what? Is this atheist going to completely ignore, reject the Big Bang theory, which is a scientific, quote-unquote fact right now?
It's evidence that sometime around 14 billion years ago, all of space-time was condensed into a really hot, really dense state. In order to get to a first moment of the universe, you need to take the observations which show that the universe is expanding, reverse them to get to the hot, dense state, and then keep going past the hot, dense state. And this is what Hawking and Penrose, Stephen Hawking and Roger Penrose did in the 20th century to show that at the beginning of the universe there was what was called a singularity. This is a genuine first moment where density goes to infinity on some models. And this would be a first moment for the universe. I just want to point out, for those who are scientifically minded here, that Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking relied on some assumptions in order to extrapolate in that manner. 4 assumptions in particular, all of which have been, all of which, I have hay fever, I suppose we've all got some. All of which have been disputed by physicists, including Penrose and Hawking themselves, who've since disputed the very assumptions they relied upon to point to a singularity.
I have never heard this ever. Like, I thought that the Big Bang theory is something we have like common ground with atheists and theists when it comes to, the beginning of the universe. That at some point of time, billions of years ago, there was nothing. All of a sudden, there was a beginning to this universe, right? And now this guy is saying, no, that's not true. Like, I don't understand his argument. How do you feel about Shiites?
My friend Phil Halper.
We can talk about it in another stream when I'm doing that topic. Right now, I'm focusing on this specific debate.
He was never far away from these discussions, either intellectually or physically, I felt. Conducted a survey recently. 2 of them, actually. The most recent one, I believe, the largest collection of physicists ever surveyed, or at least it was replicated. And the survey asked a number of questions to leading experts. And the only question that got majority consensus, at about 2/3, the only one, was that the Big Bang is not the first moment of the universe. It is a hot, dense state 14 billion years ago. We don't know if or what came before that hot state. It's simply not something that we can measure. So, scientifically, we're not on sort of solid ground. But Dr. Craig is more fond, I think, of putting...
I saw him like this, Alex O'Connor, right? On a debate with Mohammed Hijab, a long time ago. He had a different view when it comes to the Big Bang theory. And they were discussing, like, if the Big Bang theory had a beginning, right? Then there must be a causation, right? There must be a cause behind that Big Bang theory, right? And then he said, Alex O'Connor here said, yes, he called it the necessary power for that Big Bang. And then Muhammad Hijab says, yeah, that's God. That's basically God. And that's how the debate ended. That was like years ago, right? obviously now I guess he has a different kind of stance when it comes to the Big Bang. It's furthermore, I have computer.
With philosophical reasons
Well, I
why
don't
the
know.
universe must have had a beginning.
Make your own
And these
decision.
rely on the impossibility of an actual infinite.
Are you like this is like what are you literally saying? I need to check this like seriously, because this is not the common stance of atheists today and agnostics, because they adhere or they appeal to science. Science today, they say that the universe has a beginning, right? They believe in the Big Bang Theory. This guy says, no, there's an actual infinite. Yeah, this is the classical understanding of atheists. Before, like during like thousands of years ago, before the Big Bang Theory, they thought that the universe was eternal. And that's what that was, because that was the best explanation for, their existence. So that was why the existence, why that was the reason why they rejected the existence of God. Now this guy want to go back to the classical position of atheists.
That if the universe had an infinite past, that would mean that you would have had to traverse an infinite number of moments in order to get to the present. I think I'm fair in saying that this is one version of an argument you would give to say why we would say that the universe has a finite past. Is that, plausibly, in order to get to the present, you have to complete the past. But if the past is infinite, you'd have to complete an infinite series. You can't do that. And so you would never arrive at the present. And yet here we are at the present.
If you're talking about the present, past, and future, are you talking about time as an aspect? Or are you talking about the actual existence of the universe? Right? Because there's an equivocation here. I don't understand what you're talking about exactly. Are you talking about the fact that the universe had a infinite past? If you were saying that, then you have to substantiate that. You have to prove that the universe actually had an infinite past, that it existed. It's eternal, basically. And what you're saying, here's the thing. If you can prove that the universe is eternal, then the universe is God by definition, because this is what I believe. Anything that is eternal is God. So I believe that God is God because one of his attributes is that he's eternal. Okay, so if you're talking about, like, I don't know, the past, future, and present as time as an aspect, then like...
Therefore, the universe had to have had some kind of beginning. There are other reasons to think that infinities of this kind can't obtain in reality. Dr. Craig is famous for relying upon David Hilbert's famous analogy or imagery of an infinite hotel, a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and all of those rooms are full. And yet if somebody showed up to this infinite hotel and desired a room, and were told that every single room in the hotel was full, it's easy. All you have to do is tell the person in room number 1 to move to room number 2. That one's occupied, so the person in room number 2 moves to room number 3, and number 3 moves to 4, and 4 to 5, and so on. And everyone just moves up, and since it's an infinite hotel, there's always an extra number for them to move into. And then the new guest just moves into room number 1. And so, as Craig has sometimes put in the past, the hotel would have to have a sign outside that says, no vacancy, rooms available. Which, of course, seems like a contradiction.
I think that man is the one who needs the cup of tea.
He never likes to talk about this.
My sympathies.
It's horrific stuff. Losing your faith in real time, it can make anybody a bit sick. The problem I see with this is that it relies upon assumptions that might. Do we have? Are we as much as I care about Johnny, can we put him on mute? And actually, you could just leave him on mute for the rest of the evening. The problem is that these assumptions are based on intuition. It seems as though this idea that the hotel will be full and also be able to accept new guests seems like a contradiction, but it's simply not a contradiction. There are two ways in which we could understand the hotel being full. Either full means that it can take no more guests, in which case Hilbert's Hotel simply isn't full.
I ask, why should I even trust an atheist? Now they have no moral authority. Yeah, that's one of the arguments the Christian apologist brought in. He said that there's objective morality. I know exactly what he's talking about. But yeah, like that's what we believe in. Atheists, they don't have like a real moral compass when it comes to objective morality, like what's moral and what's not moral. So we'll see how that that's going to be talked about.
Because it can take new guests. So maybe by full, what we mean is every room is occupied. That's fine. Okay, every room is occupied. But you can also acquire new guests. That's true even in non-infinite examples. Like if I had a finite hotel and every single room was full, but if a new guest came into the room, into the hotel, I could just build a new room for them. I could say, no vacancy, like at least every room is full, and yet new guests can be admitted. So the idea that every room being full and it being impossible to admit new guests are the same thing is not true. Even trivially in the case of that finite hotel. But because we're so used to them coming together, it seems that when they don't, we're in some unintuitive contradiction. But I don't think concepts like Hilbert Hotel are contradictory so much as they're simply unintuitive. And bear in mind that when we are forced into extreme philosophical circumstances, we are very often asked to give up some of our most foundational intuitions. The Christian asks us to believe that God is one and yet three at the same time, which many people find profoundly unintuitive, and most of the time is defended as a kind of mystery of faith that we'll never properly understand. We have to put our intuitions on the shelf and accept that this must be true.
He got him. Yeah, well, that's a good counter argument there. The thing is that with infinity, infinity does not exist. It's only in your mind, right? It makes no sense to say like the universe is infinite, or for example, numbers are infinite. That's just an abstract. It's infinite. Infinity. It's only in your head, right? You cannot prove infinity scientifically, right? Objectively, you cannot prove infinity, right? That's the thing. You can only give like examples like that, but the example of those infinite rooms in a hotel, that makes no sense, right? Because again, space is limited in a hotel. How are you going to even imagine that? I'm trying to understand his position here. Does he like really think that the universe could be infinite, and he is trying to explain or defend his argument like it's
In the quantum realm, we're told that particles can be particles and waves at the same time, that superposition is a thing. That superposition is a thing that that things can be in the same place, so that two things can be the same place at one time, all kinds of assumptions that don't seem to make sense. Now, I think that infinity is surely one of the kinds of pressures that we would expect to upset our intuitions in that regard. On the point of the finite
because
universe,
it doesn't exist.
could the universe have an
not
infinite past?
logical.
I really like this thought about having to traverse an actually infinite number of moments in order to get to the present. Right? This is my favorite argument because it's just so intuitive. How could we arrive at the present if you had to complete an infinite to get to the present? My question is this: an infinite number of what? Because, of course, potential infinites. Jack Symes, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello. I'm on, aren't I? I poisoned Johnny Thompson so I could get my seat back as host. That's worked out pretty well. For the sake of the footage, Johnny Thompson's just aged about 10 years. So sorry, Alex, you were saying.
That's okay. An infinite number of what? Because it seems intuitive. I was writing about the Kalam cosmological argument recently, and I was trying to defend it. And I found myself saying, in order to get to the present, you would have to surpass an infinite number of... And then I stopped, and I thought, well, what works there?
Events.
Maybe events. What's an event? I mean, okay, so I pick up this glass, that's an event. But that event can be subdivided. It's the event of my cognizing the glass and moving my arm and lifting it up, and the friction between the fingers and the cup. Okay, so maybe just the event of the friction rubbing against the cup. But that event occurs across a period of time, and it can be further subdivided into individual moments. Like events can always be subdivided into smaller events as long as they persist through time. You can keep dividing the time in half and say that it's made up of further moments. Okay, so maybe like moments then. But what's a moment? Like what are we actually talking about here? Are we talking about, maybe we're talking about some measure of time. Maybe we would say something like, well, take seconds, or hours. That's fine. Maybe an infinite number of hours. Well, what's an hour? Of course, an hour is ultimately based on our orbiting around the sun. But you could say, okay, but if the sun disappeared, we could still keep counting as if it were there and keep the timer going. Except for the fact that time doesn't work like that. And time doesn't flow at the same rate at every point in the universe. In fact, the people sat on the bottom row down here are aging more slowly than the people at the top. Congratulations. As Einstein showed us. And so I'm actually not entirely sure what things we're talking about that would need to be infinite and therefore unable to obtain in reality in order to have an infinite past. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the intuition. It still seems like a hard pill to swallow that the universe might have been past infinite. But it's a pill that many people swallow, not discluding, by the way, a certain Greek marble sculpture you may have heard of called Aristotle, who himself made this important distinction between actual and potential infinities and thought that actual infinities were something that couldn't obtain in reality, And yet Aristotle believed that the universe had an eternal past. He believed that the past stretched infinitely, it stretched infinitely into the past, that the universe did. And so it seems to me unclear. I mean, that the two assumptions built into that particular point, in other words, are that actual infinities are impossible, and that a past infinite universe would count as an actual infinity. Dr. Craig, I also know, is a proponent of the A theory of time. And there are, broadly speaking, two, but there are more, but people talk about two. There's this A theory of time, the present is all that exists, the past does not exist, the future does not exist. All that exists is the present moment. I also have some trouble with that because I don't know what the present moment is. I don't know when it occurs or how long it lasts. It's very difficult to actually pin that down. It's like an infinitely thin barrier between the past and the present. It's very hard to pin down.
You know what? Now I understand why he said I'm an agnostic atheist. Because he says that God does not exist, and at the same time, he cannot explain anything because this is what agnostics do, right? I don't know what this means. I don't know what that means. Like, what is an hour? What is a moment? What is this? And what is that? Like, make up your mind, right? Make up your mind. Okay, if you don't know, and you're still trying to get your shit together, you cannot make like this. Well, I don't know what to call it. Right, like objective arguments that you like see as objective arguments, whatever, right? I still trying to understand. Does he say that since time is infinite, therefore there's always an infinite past and present and future, or does he really say that the universe today is infinite, which is according to a scientific fact or scientific theory called the Big Bang, which I thought that is something that we have in common, says that actually no, the universe had a beginning, right? And you can tell, right? They actually demonstrated that, and that's the best explanation when it comes to, to the universe. And also not just that, but scientifically they proved that it has an end as well, right? So if it's infinite, it should not have an end nor a beginning, which is, right? His position is unscientific, right? And this makes no sense. I thought atheists, they always appeal to science, and they praise science all the time. But then now, like I don't know.
The other theory is the B theory of time, which says that time is a dimension of space. Many people interpret Einstein's relativity in this way. I know that Dr. Craig does not, and in doing so is in the minority of interpreters of general relativity in supporting a neo-Lorentzian interpretation of general relativity, right? Now, neo-Lorentzian, yes. Which retains the idea of an absolute time. I'm not convinced, in other words, that... Why did I bring up general relativity? Why was I just talking about it?
There's two things at the beginning, what you were saying.
Why was I talking about it?
I don't know. I've just got here.
Johnny would have...
What I was talking about? Like, this is the thing. They talk, and they completely forget their, their train of thought. Right? That's the thing with philosophers today, especially atheist, agnostic philosophers. They got a lot of things to say, a lot of fancy words to use, but then it means nothing. Right? What do you believe in exactly? Atheists don't have the answer. Yeah, I agree with that. They have more questions than answers. Eternal universe is what many scientists think. It's more logical and supported scientifically. Wait, you said eternal? Eternal universe is what many scientists... No, this is the classical stand, like a classical position of the atheist, who believe that the universe did not have a beginning, right? So you guys, like, what happened? I thought that's this is the common ground we have with theists, right? Muslims, Christians, Jews maybe, and even atheists and agnostics, they all agree that the universe had a beginning because of the Big Bang, right? For example, Muslims appeal to their scripture. For example, the Quran says that the universe had a beginning. The Christians go to the Bible, right? And the atheists, they appeal to science. Scientifically, the Big Bang, theory explains that the universe had a beginning. What happened to that? All right, this guy completely rejects that and says, no. I think the universe it's infinite. How is that logical? Because the thing is that atheists do not accept that there is a infinite being, that there's an eternal being who has the ability and the power to create the universe, right? But they have no problem accepting and believing in a universe that is eternal.
No, Johnny, are you listening?
Johnny's not with us
I
anymore.
can't remember where I was going with that.
Johnny's in a cupboard somewhere.
If I don't jump into this
But please, yeah,
conversation,
let's have it.
soon I'm going to forget all that's been
Can
said.
I remind just two things at the
Oh,
beginning?
sorry. A theory and B theory. Just really quickly, A theory and B theory. Very simple. If the past does not exist, as Dr. Craig believes that it does not, the only thing that really exists is the present moment, then to say that the past is an actual infinite seems at least not obvious to me. The future doesn't exist. The future is a potential infinite because you keep counting into the future, on and on and on and on with no end. There's no point at which it's completed and exists as a whole. That would be an actual infinite, and that would be paradoxical. But it doesn't exist yet. Now, it's complicated by the fact that the past sort of has already existed in the past, but it doesn't exist right now. If the past doesn't exist, it seems strange to me to suggest that we can count it as this sort of boxed off.
Bro, you just built a straw man, and you just attacked your own straw man. No one is believing in this crap, right? If the past was infinite and the past always existed and this and that, here's the thing. To say that the universe had a beginning means that the past has a beginning as well, right? If you're talking about time as a concept and you're talking about past, future, and present, a concept, yeah, maybe you have an argument there. But the thing is that you are debating someone who believes that the universe had a beginning. Therefore, there was a time where the past did not exist, right? Why? Because the universe did not have a beginning yet, right? But here's the thing: we don't believe that the universe is the only thing that exists. God exists as well, right? God is infinite, right? God does not have a past, does not have a present or future, right? He's eternal. Because something can't come from nothing, this is illogical. We have something now, so there never was nothing, hence eternal universe. What happened to the Big Bang Theory, though? If you believe that's fine, right? Because something came from nothing is that how we believe God exists. Because you don't have a lot of options. Either something created the universe, right? Or the universe created itself, or something uncreated created this creation, which is God. You don't have a lot of, options when it comes to that. And when you say it's illogical, I understand that you guys are naturalists, right? And you only believe in what you can prove. Physics, you can make like a physical experience. You can physically prove something scientifically. I understand that. But the problem is that God is not physical. You cannot prove God scientifically, right? Because God is metaphysical. Or it was always in some form. Well, you were still saying that the universe is eternal. Doesn't matter what form was it in the beginning. Doesn't matter if it was small, big, singularity, like whatever it is. Okay, it existed. Okay, but the Big Bang Theory it doesn't say that something always existed. It says something came from nothing.
Thing that we can point to and call an actually infinite sort of set of things. In other words, I don't know what a moment is. I don't know why an actual infinity is necessarily contradictory, and even if it's deeply unintuitive, sometimes, in unusual circumstances, we're asked to abandon our intuitions, and it wouldn't surprise me if in the case of the infinity, this would be one of them.
All right, we're gonna move to, I'm interested on hearing what Craig is going to say now, but the contradiction that he's making, he's using something that is an abstract, and he's applying it on something that is physical, something, like the universe. The universe is not abstract. The universe is actually reality, right? Infinity is only in your mind. You cannot scientifically prove infinity. It's just in your mind.
Things in there I think important, Bill. One is Alex gave a sort of Zeno's paradox sort of thing when you were saying, I don't know what a moment is, and you can sort of keep breaking it up into little parts. There's one sort of infinity argument. And the second one was, does it make sense to have an infinite chain that expands the other way? And so do you want to say something like, time isn't infinitely divisible? And second, how do you explain if there is an infinite chain? Do you want to say there's a first cause to that as well? How do you explain the infinite chain?
Well, I think it's more important, Jack, to back up and assess the accuracy of Alex's summary of the arguments, because I think a lot of the quibble here is merely semantic rather than substantive. Now,
Well,
As Alex
basically what I
correctly
said.
suggested, the most controversial premise of the Kalam cosmological argument is the premise the universe began to exist. And in support of this premise, I offer two philosophical arguments, which Alex distinguished, but perhaps not clearly enough. The first one is based upon the impossibility of an actually infinite number of things. While the concept of actual infinity seems to be a perfectly consistent mathematical concept, once you try to instantiate that in the real world, it results in all sorts of, I think, truly intolerable situations that suggest that an actually infinite number of things can't really exist. The second argument is independent of that first argument. It doesn't deny that an actually infinite number of things can exist, but rather says that an actually infinite number of things cannot be formed by successive addition. And this is the connection with the Zeno's paradoxes that you mentioned, Jack. The version of Zeno's paradox is called the dichotomy. Says that before Achilles can cross the stadium, he has to cross halfway. But before he can cross halfway, he has to cross a quarter way. Before he can cross a quarter of the way, he has to cross an eighth of the way, and so on ad infinitum. The implication is that poor Achilles cannot even move, because before he moved any distance, he would already have to have moved half of that distance. And therefore, Zeno concluded that if reality is made up of these sorts of intervals, that motion is impossible, which is absurd, because obviously motion exists. Now,
this is what philosophy
this version of
do to you. It makes you crazy. That's what philosophy does to you. As I said, atheists only have questions. Yes, exactly. It makes he literally just said it. Now I understand why he said I'm an atheist agnostic, because this is why I don't like using philosophy when it comes to religion, right? Unfortunately, debating today, a lot of people kind of like to have this kind of conversation. Like it sounds like a couple of geeks fighting each other. It's kind of cringe sometimes. A reasonable scale surveyed by American Physical Society, 68 of physicists agreed that the Big Bang describes an expanding, hot, dense state rather than the absolute beginning of the time. Well, here's the thing. I don't care about what their idea or their opinion are. Like, what do you mean 68? Like, of physicists agree? Like, do you have like multiple? You guys have multiple opinions on what the Big Bang is?
the Kalam cosmological argument is just like the dichotomy.
Like before, when I studied that, so when I checked it out, I come up with one explanation of what the Big Bang is, right? The start of the universe, right? And that's why we have people, especially theists today, using the Big Bang theory as proof of the existence of God, because if the Big Bang is scientifically proven, meaning the universe has a start, means there must be a cause behind it. Therefore, God, right? And again, I remember, and I think I have to get that clip when Alex O'Connor here, exactly like the atheist right now we're watching. Ya wa alaikum salam, easy, what's up? Admitted. Well, he had like the natural, normal understanding of the Big Bang, and he was arguing the causation of this Big Bang, right, with Muhammad Hijab, right? And he literally said that the cause behind this is there's a necessary power that caused this Big Bang to happen, right? For any theist, the necessary power behind the start of the existence of this universe is God. But apparently, I think he changed his mind right now. So that's the thing. These philosophers, atheists, agnostics, like that's what they do. They change their minds, positions all the time. And alhamdulillah for Islam, the true religion, never changes that mind, right? It never changes. That's the thing. Science changes, like they change their mind all the time. Scientists change their mind all the time. Science change their quote unquote facts all the time, right? But the religion doesn't. So for those people who are like saying, "Oh, I left religion, I left Islam, or I left this or that because it contradicts science," yes, it's fine. If it contradicts science, meaning, the science did not have enough data to, give you like the best explanation for a specific phenomenon, it doesn't mean your religion is false. Because guess what? Later, give it a couple of years, 10, 100, 1,000 years later, the science is going to change their mind. And it happened. It happened. Like, for example, with the very Big Bang theory we're talking about, like the classical position of the atheist, they thought that the universe was eternal. Later, Big Bang theory, they changed their mind. The same thing with the sun having an orbit. What else? There's a lot of actual examples that you can find in the Quran. The Quran always gives you a scientific fact, objective scientific fact that does not change. Scientific theories, however, only gives you they call it inference to the best explanation based on data that they have at the moment. So later, and that's by definition means that they will not have a final say on the matter, because sooner or later they're going to have more data, right? And by definition, like the data is going to be limited. Sooner or later, they're going to have thanks to technology, they're going to have more data on the matter, and then maybe they're going to change their mind. And this happens all the time when it comes to science.
Dichotomy paradox, except you pull out the initial point, because Achilles has a starting point, but an infinite past, as incomprehensible as this seems, has no.
Oh, let me check audio. Let me check my audio.
Starting point. So you just mathematically pluck out that initial point and push it back to infinity. Instead of descending intervals like 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, you make all the intervals equal. And they go back to infinity without beginning. And that does nothing to suggest how that infinite past could have been traversed one interval at a time. Now, Alex, you ask, well, what are those things that are traversed? And I interjected their events. And in my work, I discuss this. What is an event? It's a type of change. And to make sure that all of the events are actual and equal, we arbitrarily, conventionally specify some chosen event as our standard event, say 1 hour or 1 day. And then we ask, how many standard intervals are there in a beginningless past? And the answer can only be an actually infinite number of such events. And these events don't all have to exist at the same time. These events have been instantiated in reality like a falling series of dominoes. That's the analogy I also like. A falling series of dominoes. The last domino falls today, but there was never a first domino. It's been beginningless. And so you can specify a certain standard.
And that's impossible. You have to say that. Yeah, that's the counter example when it comes to the like the example he gave for the infinite rooms in a hotel. This is a counter example for infinity cannot, exist. Imagine an infinite domino falling, right? You can never come to the first domino falling, because if you go to the first domino falling, that means there's a causation, right? Someone caused the first domino to fall. But if there is an infinite, so you cannot go backwards in infinity.
Event arbitrarily and then ask how many have elapsed, and the answer will be actually infinite. So that would suggest that an actually infinite past cannot elapse. Now, you're quite right, Alex, in saying that Aristotle nevertheless believed in an eternal beginningless universe, but he said the past is...
Dude, I don't know what you're talking about. The universe has no cause. It has only the first moment of time. It did not come into existence. It has no cause of existence, but the first. I don't know that's rubbish. I don't know what you're talking about. Can timeless Allah count? If Allah knows mathematics, why the concept of awl introduced later for inheritance? Yeah, I don't know what these questions have to do with the topic I'm reacting to right now. So if you have questions about Islam, feel free to DM me. Or you can go to my TikTok. I'm actually going to go live later on. And if you want to talk about, Islam, you have confusions about the religion of Islam.
Not actually
Yeah,
infinite,
that's
but
right.
potentially infinite. But here I think Aristotle was clearly conceptually mistaken. An actual infinite is a collection which is complete. All of its members are in that collection. But a potential infinite is a series that is at every point finite, but indefinitely increasing toward infinity as a limit, which it endlessly approaches, but never arrives at. So if the series of events in time is endless and will go on forever, the series of events later than any moment in time would clearly be merely potentially infinite. New events are added with each successive moment, but you never arrive at an actual infinity of events. By contrast, if you look at the series of events in the earlier than direction, that cannot be potentially infinite, because in that case, the past would be finite, but growing toward infinity in a backward direction, which contradicts the forward flow of time. So
Sorry, yeah, I didn't see your. I actually read your question, but I didn't read out. Like, yeah, does infinity prove that non-existence of God? Someone must have created it. Also, you cannot prove infinity or its non-existence. Therefore, you cannot prove or disprove the existence of God. Well, that's the thing. You cannot prove exactly. You cannot prove infinity. Infinity is something. It's just a concept in your mind. Infinity is not something that exists outside of your mind. Right? And if you think that the universe had a beginning, which is a fact, then naturally infinity does not exist. Right? And the only thing that could be infinite is God. Everything else is finite. Right? Anything else has a beginning, has an end. Logically speaking, naturally. Right? Only God has no beginning and no end. So if you describe something without a start and without an ending, and that it is eternal and it's infinite, that thing you're describing is literally God. And so they have no problem talking about the universe, giving this attribute to the universe, but the idea of God, who is all powerful, is something that they cannot accept. Not even let's not even talk about the idea, that they think we came from fish billions of years
I don't
ago.
think that those answers to the Kalam cosmological argument are at all convincing. Now, in addition to these two philosophical arguments, I was stunned to discover in my work at the University of Birmingham, in my doctoral work, that there are actually two scientific confirmations of the beginning of the universe. And notice the terminology I use there. Scientific results are always provisional. They're never certain. But we have these good philosophical, metaphysical arguments for the finitude of the past. And what contemporary science does is it confirms those arguments. That is to say, the hypothesis that the universe began to exist is much more probable, given the contemporary evidence of astrophysics, than it was without it. And so this is not refuted, Alex, by the survey you mentioned, where the scientists said that the Big Bang refers to this early hot dense state, not to the initial singularity. That's a merely semantic point. That is just saying that the label, the Big Bang, that label is given to this earlier hot dense state. It's not the label of the singularity. And that's quite true. But that isn't to deny the reality of the singularity or to say that it didn't occur. Hawking and Penrose, whom you mentioned, in their 1996 book, state, and if I can quote from memory, today almost everyone believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning in the Big Bang. So the finitude of the past, let me now add an additional point.
That's kind of confusing. Why would you say time itself had a beginning? If you say that time started with the start of the universe, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the start of the universe. You're still linking the time with the universe. Oh, yeah, makes sense. But time itself, it's an abstract. It's in your mind only. It's not something real.
doesn't require a singular beginning in the universe. Hawking and Hartle, James Hartle of University of California, Santa Barbara, offered a quantum physical model of the universe that resolved the singularity. They were able to round off that initial space-time segment of the universe so that there is no singular point like a cone has. A cone has a point in which it cannot be extended. That's where the point is. A cone can be extended in the other direction. Yeah. And the standard Big Bang model has the geometry of a cone.
I mean,
but the Hartle-Hawking model got rid of that initial point by rounding it off through the use of imaginary numbers for the time coordinate. So their model has a finite past, a beginning of the universe, but is singularity free. And so don't think that my argument for the finitude of the past, the beginning of the universe, on the basis of astrophysical cosmology or Big Bang theory, assumes that it has to be a singular beginning. There are plenty of non-singular models with beginnings. So that would be the first body of evidence.
Have you ever wondered why Alex never debate Muslims? He always like or Christianity since it's a weak religion. Well, yeah, actually there's a lot of atheists who like to base their entire, that's what I'm talking about actually. I'm actually writing something about this. For example, the title of this specific debate, it's called God and Suffering. I want to get to the suffering part. I'm not interested in this, rubbish talk right now. It's like, this makes no sense for me. It's just philosophy, and it's like, it's whatever they're trying to. These are like a bunch of crazies talking to each other. It's like geeky right now. I don't like it. I don't care. That's why I don't like philosophy when it comes to religion. But by the way, Alex O'Connor actually he debated Muhammad Hijab. I don't know if you're aware of that debate. So that's the thing. I want to see atheists debate Muslims when it comes to the problem of evil. Right? You have to understand that the problem of evil is like number one reason why people become atheists. Right? I want to see, I never saw not even one atheist actually debate a Muslim when it comes to the problem of evil. I want to see that. It's going to be interesting. Right? Because everything else is just, science just said this, scientists said that, this and that. Like, just okay, fine. But, I want to talk, watch something that is, something we can relate to, right? Everybody can relate to. Not something that you have to study in order to understand what these geeky people are talking about. Alex should debate Jews before Muslims. Actually, did you ever see any Jew debate his religion? Jews, they don't debate anything, right? They're God's chosen people. They're above that, right? Yeah, his argument is classic for atheists about suffering. Yeah, I want to see that. That's the thing. If an atheist debate a Christian when it comes to the problem of evil, they always win the debate. You know why? Because the problem of evil itself is based on the biblical God. So what I'm saying is that if you take out the biblical God, let's not even talk about Islam, because Islam completely destroys the problem of evil, the so-called problem of evil. But you just don't even grant them the biblical God or religion, then they got nothing to it's all a straw man. They literally build a straw man using the biblical God. Yeah, after that, stop talking about it. Yeah, it goes on. I always respond with the poster are good if you know it. Yeah. But that would be interesting. I want to get to the part where they start discussing, the problem of evil and suffering and all that.
It's astrophysical evidence from the expansion of the universe. But then very quickly, the second scientific confirmation that I don't think you mentioned is the evidence stemming out of the thermodynamic properties of the universe. The universe on a large scale is simply a gigantic closed system, because on naturalism, that's all there is. And there isn't anything outside of it. So if it were infinite in the past, its entropy production should have increased and increased and increased, so that it would now be in a dark, dilute, and lifeless state. And since we are not in such a state, we know that the universe must have had a beginning in which it was in a low entropy state, extraordinarily low, and has since been increasing in entropy as it's endured. And this is called the past hypothesis.
So it would be in a state of heat death if it was the case it was if
In
it was constant?
pre-relativistic physics, this was called the heat death of the universe.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
but in relativistic physics, the heat death could be either cold or hot, depending on whether the universe will expand forever or will
It's death.
recollapse.
So hot or cold, it's not a good thing. Okay, that's good. Alex, quite a bit for you to
Yeah, lots to
go
say.
through.
I find with these discussions.
Well, you mentioned so much to
I know,
respond to,
this is the
but
problem.
you're right. We don't. I do want to respond though to the point about metaphysical intuitions and the Trinity at some
That's
point.
cool. We'll get to that perhaps.
You know what? I've been watching for 40 minutes, right? I think we had enough when it comes to this talkie thing, right? Philosophy, this and that. Okay. I'm gonna move on to the suffering part, right? Because this is what I wanted to watch, right? I'm not interested by this, right? This is a waste of time, okay? But I wanna get to the suffering part, right? Because this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the the problem of evil. I want to see how this debate is gonna go. I want to see the arguments that the Christian is gonna present when it comes to, the existence of suffering.
Is metaphysically absurd. So this is due to the asymmetry of time, and I think it's out there.
But there is such thing as an hour in your view.
Pardon me?
There is such thing as an hour, a minute. A
Well,
Yeah, that's the thing.
I
I'm
think that the set
talking
of
about
past
it. Right? Like they're discussing what is an hour, what is time, what is a moment, what is an event. Like come on.
US
I don't have time for
presidents,
this.
They don't all exist right now, and yet that's clearly a set, and it can be numbered. You can say there have been 47
Yes.
U.S. presidents.
To be clear, 46. Didn't Harris? Who was it that won twice?
Well, yeah, some have served 2 terms, right?
Yes.
So I'm at the 47th. Divine psychology and say what reason would have God would have for choosing an evolutionary process, which I think we can speculate about. Nevertheless, the balance of probability is overwhelmingly in favor of theism. Animal suffering is more plausible
Oh, there you go.
written. This is incredibly mind-bending, but I think is relevant to this issue.
Yeah. Look,
Thank you.
it's difficult here because I think we could keep going back and forth forever. But that wasn't even on purpose. That was an accident, really. But I think I would be remiss not to. And the thing is, I had intended to respond to various of the arguments that you proposed at the beginning. We didn't even do the other premise of the Kalam cosmological argument.
Well, and the conclusion too.
And so I'm a little bit stuck for choice here. It's either trying to defend the proposition that things can begin to exist without a cause, or it's asking you in the space of 10 minutes to tell me why God allows suffering. Perhaps for balance, we should go with the latter. I think the main reason that people have for not believing in God, of course, the resurrection, goodness. The main reason people have for not believing in God is the existence of evil or suffering. I prefer to say suffering because evil is a sort of
All right, here we
moral
go.
nature. And to me, this argument is sort of endless and never makes very much progress in the sense that people suffer and theologians have theodicies for why they suffer. It's because of free will, it's because of
But don't
soul
you think
building.
that genuine advance was made by Alvin Planck?
No, most Christians are atheists. The Trinity makes no sense. Said that Christianity introduction to religion, we need to be better and deliver the true message of God. Absolutely, I agree with that. It always sounds sarcastic. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I can sense an ego there, and when every time Alex talks like this, well, maybe his accent, right? Just he's British, so so how you prove the non-existence of infinity? There's space, there's infinite. No, space is a creation as well. Space is not emptiness, right? You would think space is just an empty space and there's nothing there and it's infinite. No, it's not, right? Like the emptiness, right, between, for example, earth and sky, it's not empty. There's no infinity there, right? Everything is limited, including space. Space itself is creation. All right, let's get to the second part, which is the part that I'm interested in.
And his discussion of the free will defense.
Not really. But what I mean to say is that, no.
You don't think he put the death knell to the logical version of the problem of evil?
I'm not convinced in that, I'm not sure that the logical problem of evil ever really held up. But I don't.
Oh, well, that's all right.
I kind of don't want to.
That's progress.
But I kind of don't want to talk about that because I think that there is a class of individuals who are usually completely ignored in the discussion of suffering. And so, of course, non-human animals.
Yes.
Theodicies that are provided for suffering, the existence of suffering, the fact that there's human free will, the fact that there was a fall, the fact that our souls will somehow be developed, the fact that higher order goods like bravery and courage can be achieved, are plausible. But none of them apply to non-human animals. None of them apply to these animals who, for hundreds of millions of years...
Yeah. I've written quite a bit on the problem of animal suffering.
I know. So perhaps we can rehash it. Because I'd like to know why it is that you think that for these hundreds of millions of years, suffering is the defining quality of the animal experience, to the extent that this is the mechanism God chose to bring about complexity of life on Earth. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and destruction of the unfit. Disease, predation, starvation, for hundreds of millions of years. And for some reason, when we get to humans, something kind of special happens, we're ensouled, whatever it might be, such that our suffering gets to be redeemed, but not theirs. We're talking, if I were to go into the details of what happens to animals in the wild on a regular basis, I probably couldn't upload this footage to YouTube because it would get flagged for being too extreme, as you well know. So perhaps in the time remaining, we could talk about why it is you think that God would not just allow this, but build it into the very mechanism by which life comes to vary in its complexity on Earth.
The question here is whether or not the existence of animal suffering in the world is more plausible given naturalism or atheism than it is given theism. And I would argue that animal suffering is vastly more improbable given naturalism or atheism than theism. And therefore, even if our inability to penetrate divine psychology and say what reason would have God would have for choosing an evolutionary process, which I think we can speculate about, nevertheless, the balance of probability.
Yeah, I did. I literally have a video before in my live section. I already reacted to that, but not the entire thing. You know, I get. I'm sorry, but I cannot stand a bunch of women screaming in my ear. Right, like it's. She baked them. She cooked them all. Right, like there's no need to watch the entire thing. Yeah, I kind of feel bad for those Christians anyway. Yeah. This depends on the theory of evolution.
Is overwhelmingly in favor of theism. Animal suffering is more probable on theism. Now, why do I say that? Well, the reason is because if naturalism were true, then it is incomprehensibly more probable that there wouldn't even be life, much less sentient life.
Well, what's the question again? Like, what's okay? Look. Is he saying that God does not exist because animal suffers? We say there's a reason behind animal suffering. Okay, there's wisdom behind everything, including animals, humans suffering. Okay, God exists is the best explanation for animal suffering, right? For you, however, as an atheist, you just say, "Oh, it sucks to be you." That's like, what is the wisdom? What is the reason behind animal suffering, for example? Okay. The problem with the atheists, they go like, oh no, your God says he's all merciful and all just and all powerful. And they take these three specific attributes and they say, okay, if these three are your God and animal suffering exists, therefore your God does not exist, right? And therefore I reject that God, whatever, right? So it's not real. The argument itself is not enough for rejecting. It's not really an argument for rejecting the existence of God. Rather, is that they think God did not do a good job because suffering exists, right? But they forgot there's another attribute of God, which is God is all wise, right? Again, we Muslims, we don't say that God is all merciful. Like, all merciful means he gives mercy to everything and everyone and everything has mercy, has God's mercy. We don't say that. We say God mercy only given to those who deserve it. He's the most merciful, all just the most merciful, right? So yes, according to the biblical perspective, being all just and all powerful and all merciful, and then the existence of evil, create a contradiction.
That could experience suffering. And of course, we're back here to the old fine-tuning argument, aren't we? That given the fine-tuning of the universe, this is vastly more probable given theism than given naturalism. And so, in a sense, the existence of animal suffering as well as human suffering is actually evidence for theism. Because if naturalism were true, it's overwhelmingly more probable there wouldn't be any sentient life and hence no suffering.
Yes, I understand this line of argument.
Pardon me?
I understand this line of argument. I understand what you're getting at. The issue is I feel like it kind of sidesteps the concern.
It sidesteps.
It sidesteps the concern.
Yes, it does.
Because there are many people who believe, for example, that there is some kind of naturalistic explanation for fine-tuning, even if we don't know what it is. There are people here who disagree with you, Dr. Craig, that think that those arguments aren't sound, aren't strong, at least to the point where they remain agnostic about the existence of a God, such that the only data that they can really touch and feel, that really sort of strikes them as the most sort of important and plausible, is the existence of animal suffering. So I suppose I could frame it this way. Suppose it were the case that all else were equal.
That what?
That all else were equal. That otherwise, apart from this piece of data. Apart from this piece of data.
But why should we make such a hypothesis that all else were equal when it's not?
So that we can isolate this particular point of data and see if it at the very least decreases the probability of God's existence.
So you're saying, what if animal suffering were just as probable on naturalism as on theism? Then what?
I'm saying let's grant the existence of animal suffering and say, given that fact about the universe, okay, let's grant that there is a universe that exists. Let's grant that there's a universe that exists that abides by physical laws. Now, if you want to say that we can't have the conversation about why animals would be allowed to suffer until we've addressed the fine-tuning argument, then we'll probably need a bit more time. But also, I don't think that functions for people who simply are willing to say, well, I just don't agree with the fine-tuning argument. I still want to know why it is that God would allow animals to suffer.
If that's to be more than just an opinion or psychological autobiographical comment, they need to give some good arguments against the fine-tuning argument. And my impression from reading the literature is that today, this fine-tuning argument is the argument for the existence of God that is taken most seriously by non-theists.
Can you take Alex is just looking at the systemic problem of evil, the problem of evil against theism from evolution by natural selection, ignoring the others?
Yeah,
Does that argument itself count against it?
Alex, because I did say I think we can speculate about God's reasons for allowing an evolutionary history to the world. It seems to me that God's overall purpose for creating life on earth is for the purpose of human salvation, and that his goal is to create a world in which the optimal number of people would freely come to know and embrace eternal salvation, which is an incommensurable good to which the suffering in this world cannot even be compared. And I don't think it is at all improbable, not in a whit improbable, that only in a world suffused with natural and moral evil that the optimal number of people would freely come to embrace God and his salvation and so find eternal life. And that could well be the reason for creating the world with an evolutionary history that involved, as you say, a lot of animal suffering.
So the suggestion would be that an animal like a zebra, which gets its windpipe caught in the jaws of a lion, which is how they're often predated upon, that no human ever sees, that no human's ever aware of, that no other animal is even ever aware of, is somehow necessary. The conditions under which that occurred are somehow necessary to bring people to salvation in Christ.
You know, this is the interesting
I don't
thing
understand.
about...
Why, first of all, why is fine-tuning has to do with the suffering of animals? Okay, I can see the relationship there, but now he's talking about what is the suffering of animals has to do with the resurrection of Christ? Like, what are we talking about exactly here? Like this, I don't see the correlation, right? But here's the thing: we have reality, right? We have actual animal suffering. We have actual human beings suffering. We have evil in the world, right? Now, we want a reasoning. We want a explanation for that existence of that specific thing, right? We want a simple explanation of the existence of evil. The best examples when it comes to theists is religion, is God, because without God, there is no meaning to evil. There is no meaning to what's good and what's right, or what's right and what's wrong. Okay, there is no meaning to good and evil anymore, right? The best explanation for that is God. Everything makes sense with the existence of God. Now we have a reality. We have the suffering of animals. I want to know what is the wisdom behind the suffering according to atheists. According to atheists, there is no wisdom behind it. There is no reason. It's just that it's unlucky to be you. That's it. Which is a unsatisfying answer. No one is going to be satisfied with that. Right? So here's the thing. I feel like every single debate, it is us theists trying to defend our reason behind our belief. And no one is pushing back the atheists. It's always the theists who has to like justify why they believe in and what they believe in, right? I want to understand, why do you think your belief or your reasoning is better than mine, right? I wonder if that's going to happen.
The natural world. The tiniest perturbations can, over time, have a kind of ripple effect such that enormous consequences can follow from seemingly trivial incidents, like a zebra's having its trachea collapse. This is called the butterfly effect, and it's illustrated in chaos theory and in quantum theory as well. So that I think we're in no position at all to say, when we see some instance of evil, that God probably doesn't have a good reason for permitting that to occur.
Am I expected to believe that God is somehow bound by this precarious butterfly effect from a particular instantiation of animal suffering, that somehow brings about salvation, that without which God could have found no way to bring about the same salvation? It seems extremely
well, we don't
plausible.
know. I mean, see, this is again where we're into the realm of pure speculation. But I'm saying it's not implausible that only in a world suffused with natural and moral evil that the optimal number of people would find eternal salvation. I mean, think of the
When he's talking about Pauline, yeah.
results of that evolutionary history of the earth.
I mean, they
The
worship him.
primeval
Why would they say that?
forests that were laid down now form the basis for the fossil fuels that have made modern civilization possible. Should God have instead created what's called an omphalos world with a mere appearance of age rather than having an actual evolutionary history? That would be intolerable. We'd have to regard most of our empirical beliefs about the past.
2 minutes to go.
As if those are the only two options. I mean, the idea that, because we rely on fossil fuels temporarily at a point in our sort of human technological trajectory, that relied on animals becoming fossilized, and the only way that God could have provided us the fuel to bring about the Industrial Revolution would have been to create fossils which look like they're ancient animals, but actually, or he could have just used a different fuel.
Pardon me?
He could have just used a different fuel. Provided us a different fuel.
Well, see, then you're totally into pure speculation, about worlds operating according to different laws of nature and so forth. We have no idea what that's like. So remember, this is supposed to be an argument for atheism. It's the atheist who bears the burden of proof of showing that God cannot have morally sufficient reasons for creating a world with an evolutionary history. And I think that's a burden of proof the atheist cannot bear.
I find it difficult to believe that God is somehow constrained by these environmental conditions, such that he can't bring about the world he wants, which is a flourishing world of humans who freely choose to come to know him, without the existence of fossil fuels.
It's a matter of whether or not it's plausible that in order to create a world in which the optimal number of people come to freely know him and embrace salvation, that world would involve a very considerable degree of natural and moral evil.
Possible.
And I don't know how the atheist could show that such a thing is improbable.
By saying it's impossible but seemingly implausible. I mean, it just seems that you can understand how it seems on the surface extremely implausible to say that God could not maximize salvation without fossil fuels.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what would happen in such a world. I gave one alternative, that God created an omphalos world that has coal beds and oil fields and so forth that never were the result of decayed vegetation and eons of primeval forests. And that would force us to regard the past as largely illusory. Then you could say, well, maybe he could have created different laws of nature and things. Right? But then we don't know how many people in those worlds
The very final reply.
do embrace
different laws of
salvation.
nature. I mean, what about a world in which animals exist and function in the same way, but they're not sentient?
But what?
But they're not sentient.
They're not sentient.
Sentient, yeah.
Well, the
Why not?
question, could you have a dog or a horse or a sheep that functions and isn't sentient? It wouldn't have any pain awareness. It would be no consciousness.
Of course you could.
You think so?
Absolutely, yeah. But, why not? You could have, if the reason why these animals exist are for things like laying down the ecosystem, there's absolutely no reason to suggest that there couldn't be an animal which mechanically functions in exactly the same way as an animal that has sentience, but is not in fact sentient. It still moves away from certain inputs in the way that metal can react to environment by rusting. An animal can react to an environment in particular in extremely complex ways, just sans consciousness. I mean, I struggle to believe that God can be sat around with his angels saying, I want to create an animal that doesn't feel pain. And the angels saying, do you really think that's possible?
It's the atheist who needs to show that a morally perfect God should have chosen a world like that, if it's even possible, rather than a world like this. And it's not clear to me that is obligatory. The atheist seems to know more about divine psychology than I think he really does.
Look, I really wish Johnny was still here so he can interrupt you, because I don't want to end this conversation. I really don't. I can't ignore the sentience of the people who are here who've brought their questions.
And Muslims start open discussion like Christians. Like, we have discussions all the time. Like, I personally have discussions with non-Muslims on TikTok all the time. I get like all kind of non-Muslims, like there's Christians, atheists, all kind of people that come to me. We have discussions all the time. Actually, our religion tells us to go and have discussions and invite people to the religion, basically. What are you talking about? So yeah, no. It sounds exactly like that. Yeah. Pain is bad. Suffering is bad. It becomes an emotional argument for the atheist. When you actually dumb it down and you understand their actual argument when it comes to the problem of evil and the existence of suffering and all that, it's an emotional argument. Suffering is bad. I don't feel good. Therefore, God does not exist. Which, by the way, does not follow. It doesn't follow at all. Okay, here's my take. Actually, listen to this. Here's my take. Forget about the biblical God. Forget about the God. Forget about the God that exists. Forget about religion exists. Okay, we have a reality right now. Okay, that suffering actually exists, and God exists. Can you prove that God does not exist just because suffering and evil exists? You understand what I'm saying? Because again, to make this problem of evil argument, they have to appeal to the biblical God, and they borrow a couple of attributes, and then they make their argument. Okay, but forget about the biblical God. Forget about religion that teach you who God is. The fact that evil exists does not negate God's existence. It does not correlate. It does not, follow whatsoever, right? I would say, let's say God is evil, right? I'm not saying this, but let's say God is evil and He allows evil to exist. So what? What are you gonna do about it? Because here's a fact. You're saying that since evil exists, then whoever created evil is evil. I'm going to grant you that, even though this is not what I believe, and this is completely wrong, but I'm going to grant you that. How is that going to negate God's existence, right? So it becomes an emotional argument to the Christians, right? I'm actually writing something about this, but I'm going to make it even more clearer. And I never heard anyone making this actual arguments, because again, every time that I hear an atheist talking about the problem of evil, it's always using the biblical God, the attributes of the biblical God to make their case. And also, they add some philosophy to it, so it just, sounds interesting, sounds smart, but in fact it's not. It's just really, really an emotional argument. Yeah, guys, please don't spam, all right? If you have whatever you want to say, just say it, no problem, but don't spam. Like stadium discussion without TikTok followers. What? I got some followers on TikTok. What are you talking about? I got thousands. I got actually millions of viewers cross platforms, by the way. It's unbelievable though. Like you would say like it's couple of thousands of followers, but the impact is actually huge. That's what scares me. That's why I want to, get more knowledgeable before I talk about anything. What's so popular? If I'm the person that recognizes you. Wow, God is evil. So God can be a tyrant. Yeah, I never said that. Okay, I specifically said, let's grant the atheists their argument, right? And I literally said, this is not what I believe, and I don't believe that God is evil, right? But
long this
you
evening.
hear whatever you
We're
want.
opening up to questions from the floor. We'll start from the left. Big raised hand.
Wait, that's it? They're gonna take questions now? That's the end. That's the end of the entire debate. This is so disappointing. I'm actually disappointed.
Thank you both. Alex, I've seen seagulls float on air, and they clearly seem to be delighting in it. Dogs, animals. I think you put too much emphasis on suffering, where I think the animals can delight in their life and play. And Bill, I remember last event you mentioned that the purpose of life is salvation, and that it was to behold God and to glorify in Him. Don't you think God could be more like an artist, and all of creation is this beautiful thing that He's creating?
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, animals can surely take delight in things too, but I think if you look at the totality of the natural world, particularly historically, and add up the pleasure and the suffering involved in animals' existence, I think there's good reason to think that the suffering outweighs it. I mean, the number of vertebrates who are even alive on the planet today is so large that we can only possibly estimate.
So what? What if animals suffer? So what? Yeah, I know suffering exists, evil exists. Now let's talk about it. Like this is the thing. They talk, they put that in the title, but they didn't really talk about it. Just talk about a bunch of philosophical rubbish things. I'm disappointed in this. I'm sorry, but I'm disappointed in this debate. I thought it's gonna be like more profound, more scripture, more religious answers, right? More objective language, not just philosophy. Like he literally says he uses a bunch of words and he says, I don't know what it means. Yeah, I know, because it's subjective. Those are abstract. Those are concepts that may have multiple explanations depending on the context. So of course, again, this is why I don't like philosophy when it comes to salvation, right? Do not use philosophy or science when it comes to your. Actually, you just have to focus on what's logical and what's simple. Religion should be simple. Your salvation should be simple. And that's the thing. When I see someone start using philosophy to justify, to explain their religion, it's already too late. That means you cannot explain your religion or your belief in a normal, simple language. Then you resort to using a language that is more sophisticated to confuse the people like around you and anyway, guys, I'm gonna head to TikTok. I'm gonna have some debates with mostly Christians and non-Muslims, inshallah. I'm gonna have some discussions going. If you wanna join me there, it's the same name. Go to TikTok and type Ayub Mindset. You should be able to see me. See you in a bit, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.